Our next genius had strong opinions, especially about buildings. Yet the architecture of the city, she wrote, is never found in one individual building, but rather in the way it relates to the city itself and its people. This is the story of a CUNY graduate who became a MacArthur Fellow and her unwavering fight to preserve the soul of our city.
Will you welcome, please, direct from the Times, Ada Louise Huxtable. What would you say, though? Isn't New York worse now than it was when I came here a few years ago?
I think New York is getting progressively worse. In fact, the things you said at the beginning of the show, which were so amusing, also made it very clear how bad it is. The breeze that stops the subway and the pollution in the air. And yet we are all very dedicated. We do stay here. And you say you'd like to leave, but there is a tremendous commitment to the city by many people. There's something about the city. It has a kind of a magic and magnificence in spite of all its problems that keeps people here.
Ada Louise Huxtable, the first full-time architecture critic at the New York Times, may have looked like a gentle soul, but you wouldn't want to find yourself on the receiving end of her criticism. She loved the city and its history and despised any new work of architecture that didn't fit in its grandeur. According to Ada, good architecture was every New Yorker's right, and she was more than willing to dedicate her career to defending it. This sentiment, however, didn't develop in a vacuum. Born in 1921 to a middle-class family on the Upper West Side, Ada was exposed to good architecture since her early childhood. In fact, her family home, St. Urban on 285 Central Park West, was a well-known New York City landmark. Her appreciation for good architecture only grew stronger after she started attending art history classes in another famous New York City landmark, Hunter College. It was there that she had her first experiences with hands-on design. Her set design work on the Hunter College productions of Yellow Jacket in 1940 attracted some curious eyes at the New York Times editorial and heralded her later involvement with this giant of American journalism. While at Hunter, she also won the first prize in an interior design contest sponsored by Bloomingdale's. This eventually led to her employment in another iconic building. After graduating from Hunter with honors in 1941, she started working at the Bloomingdale's flagship store on Lexington Avenue. Her tenure as a sales clerk in the furniture department was cut short after a surprising encounter. Many young architects and designers made the obligatory tour of the rooms, she later wrote. One of them noticed and married me. Garth Huxtable, an industrial designer, became Ada's partner, not only in marriage, but also as a lifelong supporter of her illustrious career. Ada continued her studies at NYU's Institute of Fine Arts, and in 1946, she was offered a position at the Museum of Modern Art in the Department for Architecture and Design. Working under the famed architect Philip Johnson, she developed a keen eye for modern architecture, an ability that would prove extremely valuable in her later career. In 1950, after receiving a Fulbright Fellowship, she left the Museum of Modern Art and spent a year in Italy, studying post-war Italian architecture. And in 1958, she received a Guggenheim grant for research in the field of structural and design advances in American architecture. Equipped with this new knowledge and experience, Ada returned to her home city and started writing. At first, her elegant writing style seemed a natural fit for the pages of more traditional art magazines, where the ideal of aesthetics in architecture left little room for questions about practicality or social impact. As her article started addressing contemporary topics, it became evident that her writing talent came with an extraordinary ability to break down even the most complex issues of modern architecture and make them relatable to everyday readers. This ability didn't go unnoticed, and in 1963 she was hired by the New York Times as the first full-time architecture critic, a position specifically created for her.
There was no architecture critic. In fact, when I started writing for the New York Times and when Clifton Daniel asked me to do the job full-time, he said, "What shall we call you?" And we decided that it was architecture critic.
Using the New York Times as a platform, Ada continued her professional ascent. As her intelligent and fearless commentary started shaping the views of the general public, the underlying theme of her criticism became more evident. Architecture is not an isolated act of creating physical structures. It is a social practice that has profound effects on urban environments, as well as on the lives of the people who live in them.
I think it's the greatest of the arts because it is such a complex art. It's the art we must live with. You want to experience painting or sculpture, it's an option. But there is absolutely nothing optional about your experience of architecture.
As one of the defining voices of the modernist era, Ada was known as a supporter of change and innovation in architecture. But, unlike some of her modernist contemporaries, she also understood the importance of historic preservation. Deeply affected by the demolition of the historic Penn Station site, she wrote, "We would probably be judged not by the monuments that we build, but by the ones that we destroyed." Over the years, she became known as the champion of the preservation movement and used her influence to promote the enactment of the first landmark law in 1965. Yet her understanding of preservation went far beyond the regular traditionalist point of view. She heavily criticized what she called the Disneyfication of New York, seen in the corporate beautification of its historical sites. This fierce criticism of the corporate-driven architecture and the lack of meaningful planning in the public sphere became the defining characteristic of her life work. Feared by many and respected by all, this petite woman became both the darling of the public and at the same time its most fearsome critic. In 1970, Ada was awarded the first ever Pulitzer Prize for criticism, and in 1981, at the age of 60, after working in the daily grind at New York Times for nearly 3 decades, she received a MacArthur Fellowship. Now financially independent, she was able to quit the New York Times and start writing on her own terms. This, however, didn't mean less productivity. For another 3 decades, Ada Louise Huxtable continued to write with the same youthful passion and commitment, covering the widest range of topics, from biographical accounts to questions of public zoning, discussions about the essence of architecture or protection of cultural sites. In her last article, published a couple of weeks before her death at the age of 91, Ada made a case against the proposed radical remodeling of the New York Public Library. In her passionate plea, she argued that the Beaux Art masterpiece plays an essential role in keeping the city's dynamic vitality and brutal beauty alive. Less than a week after her text got published, New York Public Library announced that it was going to reconsider its plans for remodeling. In 2013, a year after Ada's death, the Getty Institute announced its acquisition of her archive, a huge body of work containing 93 boxes and 19 file drawers of Ada's manuscripts and other documents. But even larger is the impact she had on the city she called home, where she implored a generation of architects to reconsider the relationship between the future and the past. And to half a century's worth of ordinary New Yorkers, this soft-spoken architecture critic had the roar of a lion.